عظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا بأبي عبد الله الحسين عليه السلام وأولاده وصحبه. May God continue to reward you, us, for all our efforts in memorializing Imam Hussein and his family and his companions, and for gathering as we have been doing and we will continue to be doing virtually to commemorate what happened to Imam Hussein and to try and learn from the exemplars that he and his companions provided of how we should live our lives and how we should fulfill our duty to one another, how we should fulfill what we owe to one another. The new format of the program, which will continue from what started yesterday, will be a poem in English to begin with by Sayyid Ali Naqvi, followed by the Source Khani from Lucknow, followed by our main address today, who is Sayyid Hadi Rizvi, and then Noha Khani will be provided by the Tijani brothers, and finally the Ziyarat. So that again will be the format for today. Before I pass the mic to Sayyid Ali Naqvi, I'd ask you all to join me in reciting Surah Al-Fatiha, particularly for those who are afflicted by COVID-19 and who are unwell. So for all of our sick and who are unwell, please recite Surah Al-Fatiha. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. So now, Sayyid Ali Naqvi, Bismillah.
Today's poem is a continuation of the narrative poem that I began yesterday, describing the maqtal of Imam Hussein and the musibah of our Mawla. And it's again written the same format in terms of an epic poem that's based around the English and the Latin, the Greek narratives and literature. So it has a lot of allusion and stuff in it. And it carries on the journey where yesterday we saw Mawla rejecting the offer of intervention from Jibreel and the king of the jinn. He now begins to approach the armed force ahead of him. All the shaheed have gone. The tents are behind him. There is no one left, and he's on his own, facing down the army of the Umayyads. Salawat. Zuljanar's reins are loose now. It knows. Ahead of them, massed ranks shift uneasily. The air forms waves behind, like a wake, as it trots its white coat ghosts through the haze. The sun begins to pale into itself. The horizon marches with it, like Pegasus, like wings scraping their tips along the sand. The Shah approaches. One man, yet full drawn from sky to the shadow of noon, as if, indeed, heaven had sent down all its might. He stops, and the shield wall shrivels backwards. Do you know who I am? In fear, they hum. Yes, Hussein ibn Ali, we know who you are. Hussein knows they will forget or erase the evidence of their eyes and their black souls, but the Sayyid serves the maker of time, and he will write into its very flesh this day. He will ink it with the tears of Zahra. I am Fatima, Zahra's beloved. I rode on the shoulders of the Prophet. The house of revelation where the book, the truth was laid out for you was our home. Does any one of you deny this? They know. The fear fuges through them as they nod. You have murdered those that were mercy. Yet, mercy demands an atom of remorse, must be rewarded with a world of love. Allah may forgive you, so I ask you, what will end this? There is a hush. Truth rings. Doubt drives the army mad. Could they be saved? Sa'ad sees his army begin to turn, so scrambles up to his saddle to shout, "Your hand, Ya Ibn Ali, your hand ends this now. We have heard your pious promises. Enough of us fell for them, but now I trust in victory, honor, and pure gold. So give us your oath so we may feast tonight." Never. Hussein sits straight, Haqq ignited in his veins. Then your head, Ibn Ali. Give us your head. Inshallah, see how the thirsty fight. Come, take it. Hussein draws Zulfiqar and the blade sings. Its lamentation, a wail of pain, almost splinters the scabbard it bursts from. The sword trembles as witness to the grief gone before it, and it remembers, it sees from the fair to the brave and honored that were felled, rent by horse, hoof, and spear. To the grave it carved out for the silent child. The blade is ready, its edges glint for work. Hussein pulls tight on his reins, and Zuljinar rears, its mane cresting like the tops of a doom wave. The army is transfixed as the hooves beat their hearts. Then they turn and they run as fear bleaches their bones. But Zuljinar and Zulfiqar move like fury and righteousness manifest, with the blade howling like the solar gale that birthed it, withering the ramshackle horde as it panics. Dread stalks them, and they feel mercy leave them. Some finally penitent drop guard and salute the Shah as the blade sends them to their reckoning. Some, wretched to the last, writhe as they fall, Zulfiqar's thirst song shattering the army. As the din of male and men fades, Zuljinar turns. The Shah watches the remnants for reform. He is torn in places, but not done. Not the son of Ali. So he gathers Zuljinar again with while the eager blade hums, but the sun has dragged itself higher and a voice calls, "Enough, Hussein, enough. Love calls itself Hussein. Faith calls itself Hussein. Life calls itself Hussein. Enough, Hussein, enough. Justice calls itself Hussein. Sacrifice calls itself Hussein. Desolation calls itself Hussein. Enough, Hussein, enough. Kauthar calls itself the tears of Hussein. Look to the sky, beloved. Worship calls itself Hussein. Enough, Hussein, enough. Be Hussein." Hussein begins to release his handhold, placing the sword in its place, placing the protesting sword in its place. Looking to the sky, he sees it is time for prayer, and Hussein is prayer. There is no water. Hussein accepts the purification of spears instead. Zuljinar, wings of arrows forming in its flanks, lowers him gently to the burning sands. On a bed of broken arrows and armor, the Sayyid worships, those wounded lips uttering Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, as the blunt knife cuts. And through the entirety of creation, Jibreel begins to lament. Hussein has been murdered in Karbala. Hussein has been slaughtered in Karbala. Wa musibata, wa musibata. Salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد أجركم على الزهراء. We will now go to Lucknow for the source Khani. Bismillah.
पढ़िए थोड़ा तेज।
बानो अकबर से कहे ऐ मेरे अफसोस बानो अकबर से कहे ऐ मेरे अफसोस तेरी सूरत को कहूँ या के अफसोस मिल गया खाक में तू अहमद सानी अफसोस मिल गया खाक में तू अहमद सानी अफसोस हाय उम्मद ने तेरी कदर न जानी अफसोस बानो अकबर से कहे
जबकि ज़ैनुल आबिदीन इब्ने इमाम इब्ने इमाम जबकि ज़ैनुल आबिदीन इब्ने इमाम इब्ने इमाम काफिला अहले हरम का ले चले ज़ुमुल के शाम राह में पूछा किसी ने सर ये है किसके तमाम किसके तमाम और ये है ताबूत किसका तब किए रो रो
सब सरों का पेशवा शेरे खुदा का पूत है सब सरों का पेशवा शेरे खुदा का पूत है मेरे कांधे पर सकीना प्यासी का ताबूत है जबकि ज़ैनुल आबिदीन वो सलाम कहिए हुसैन पर के बहिश्त जिसका सिला मिले वो सलाम कहिए हुसैन पर के बहिश्त जिसका सिला मिले ये तलब तो अपनी तरफ से है मुझे देखिए वहाँ क्या मिले वो सलाम कहिए हुसैन जो डरे हुसैन का हो गदा उसे हो रसाई अली तलब जो डरे हुसैन का हो गदा उसे हो रसाई अली तलब जो अली मिले तो नबी मिले जो नबी मिले तो खुदा मिले सलाम कहीं ये हुसैन पर जो बहार बाग़े बतूल है वो सवार दोष रसूल है जो बहार बाग़े बतूल है वो सवार दोष रसूल है तेरा मर्तबा है वो मर्तबा के जो तू मिले तो खुदा मिले वो सलाम कहिए हुसैन बड़ा हुर का यारो नसीब था के जो पहुंचा नार से नूर में बड़ा हुए का यारो नसीब था के जो पहुंचा नार से नूर में हुआ फजल हक का जो सामना तो हुसैन रहनुमा वो सलाम कहिए हुसैन जो बहार बाग़े बतूल है वो सवार दोष रसूल है तेरा मर्तबा है वो मर्तबा के जो तू मिले तो खुदा वो सलाम कहिए हुसैन पर फातिहा यजीद से बाबा का सर मिला आबिद को, जब यजीद से बाबा का सर मिला, सर क्या मिला के मरहमे जख्मे जिगर मिला, मुद्दत के बाद बाप के सर से पे सर मिला, माहे सफर में शाम से हुक्मे सफर मिला, माहे सफर में शाम से हुक्मे सफर मिला, देखा जो अहले बैत में फर्क़े जनाब को, तारों ने आके घेर लिया महताब को आबिद को, जब यजीद से बेवों ने बारी बारी लिया गोद में वो सर, ज़ैनब ने होठ रख दिए भाई के होठों पर, दरिया बहा के आंखों से बोली वो नौहागर, भैया फिरी है आपकी हमशीर दर बदर, जिस रोज से जुदा हुई मैं दम से आके, नज़ों से पुश्त जख्मी है दिल गम से आपके आबिद को, जब यजीद से बाबा का सर मिला, हमसे कलेजा सीने के अंदर दहल चुका, भैया तुम्हारा कुनबा खुले सर निकल चुका, देखो मरीज बेटा भी कांटों पर चल चुका, दरिया किनारे आग से खैमा भी जल चुका, दरिया किनारे आग से खैमा भी जल चुका, अदब कुछ न पासो अदब था रसूल का, लाए है इज़्तिहाम में गुनबा बतूल का आबिद को, जब यजीद से बाबा का सर मिला, भैया हमारी तुमको खबर है या नहीं, भैया हमारे सर से रिदाएं उतर गई, भैया तुम्हारी बेटी के है सैलियां लगी, भैया तुम्हारी बहनें या रस्सी में बंधी, भैया तुम्हारी बहनें या रस्सी में बंधी, बंदा हमारे हाथ के ऊपर शदीद है, भैया हम एक रस्सी में 12 असीर है आबिद को, जब यजीद से बाबा का सर मिला, 10वां भी 20वां भी हुआ कैद ही में हार, भैया तुम्हारा फातिहा भी हम न देने पाए, कितना कहा के सर मेरे भाई का कोई लाए, पर क्या शकावत उनकी ये ख्वाहर तुम्हें सुना, पर क्या शकावत उनकी ये ख्वाहर तुम्हें सुना, जब फातिहे का आपके हम नाम लेते पानी भी उस दिन आए नारी न देते थे आबिद को जब यजीद से
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد أجركم على الزهراء. This was the Source Khani which we've been having every day from Lucknow, which will continue. And as I said from the beginning, it's very important for us to keep these traditions alive because they indicate an element of both what is affective about gatherings and also what is aesthetic. And often in modern times, we lose sight of what the aesthetic is and the artistic in the way in which we do things. We will now move to our main address, and this will be Sayyid Hadi Rizvi, who will be addressing us. He will, as I said, as we've been doing all along, he'll be addressing this broad theme, this broad topic of Walaya and Aza in the age of COVID-19. So I'll pass the mic to Sayyid Hadi Rizvi. Bismillah.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل نعم المولى ونعم النصير الحمد لله رب العالمين نحمده ونستعين ونتوب إليه ونصلي ونسلم على عبد المؤيد ورسول المسدد المحمود الأحمد سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيت الرسول الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين المنتخبين المظلومين أما بعد فقد قال الله تعالى في كتابه الحكيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا استجيبوا لله وللرسول إذا دعاكم لما يحييكم صدق الله العلي العظيم وصدق رسول الأمين ونحن على ذلك من الشاهدين والشاكرين صلوات. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. I'd like to begin by thanking Allah for allowing these difficult times for many of us to take this as an opportunity and turn our homes into fi bayutin adhina Allahu an turfa'a wa yadhkura fiha ismuhu. In houses Allah has allowed to be raised and wherein His name is celebrated. These times allow us this unique opportunity for all of us within our own homes to constantly or in an increased manner remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't export the remembrance to only, or keep the remembrance in the walls of the mosques. Because, and how is this related to what we have gathered for? Because truly the remembrance of Imam Hussein or any Imam cannot be accomplished without the mention and remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If, and the reason why we remember any of these Imams, any of the holy personalities is because they remind us and take us back towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I'd like to extend my appreciation also to the organizers who've collected admirers of the Ahlul Bayt worldwide to come together and participate in these gatherings. In the verse that I just recited, the Fi Bayutin Adna Allah, just before it, this is from Surah Nur, in the verse just prior to it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is discussing His light, the nur. Not light is not an accurate translation, but he discusses the nur. And one of the descriptions that is mentioned there is la sharqiyyatin wa la gharbiyya, neither eastern nor western. And the current situation that we're in, it allows us to bring this light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to our homes wherever they are. We have people in this majlis who are reciting from the subcontinent. We have people from Europe and myself in North America. We've all come together with one purpose. So this has become a medium for us to try and to exemplify these verses. This is not an interpretation of the verse, of course, it's just a thought that's inspired from it. This age of COVID has us reconsidering our reality. And for some, maybe even the idea of reality itself. For many years, the online arena has seemed like a separate world, particularly for those who've been using it for over a decade. The world was one which was considered as not being real. Mostly people turned to it in order to escape the world that they were in, their day-to-day life, their 9 to 5. However, slowly, this cyber world was growing. And it came to the extent where the lines between online and offline became blurred. COVID-19 blurred these boundaries even further. It forced us to embrace our potential increased existence in this space, even in areas previously that we would have preferred to have a choice in separating, meaning we would have preferred to keep certain things offline, whereas now we're being pushed further and further into, at least currently, in this current period, to accept this presence online. Gradually over this time, of course, the definition of virtual has also changed. And it's come to accommodate the extent that this phenomenon has grown, meaning this virtual world. When we first started using social media, those of us from the early 90s at least, we saw that, back then, the content differed very much, the advertisers differed very much. The things that you would see, the advertisers that would appear, they weren't targeted, they were generic. Many businesses hadn't come online yet. So it was a very different world. It was very much about you and your groups. But now, in 2020, what we're seeing is that even at the level of national politics, important conversations take place in the virtual world. We're seeing that even world leaders are interacting through social media. We're seeing that even the encouragement for people to engage in and participate in, for example, elections, the encouragement is being done through these mediums, the virtual world. So it's becoming more and more a part of our lives, and in a way which, as I mentioned, now we're able to distinguish between the offline and the online world. There was a point when virtual was put in opposition to real. When you meant virtual, when you were talking about something being virtual, when you spoke about your virtual life, you're talking about your life that was separate from your day-to-day life, your real life, your work, your education, your family, your friends offline and your friends online. They were all very distinct from one another. But slowly, this definition began to change. Now we just saw it as a physical appearance and a non-physical appearance. And we see this within even the translations of virtual into other languages. So for example, Persian, the virtual is referred to as majaz, which means figurative or unreal, or is referring to something which is an unoriginal space. And contemporary Shia philosophers such as Ayatollah Jawadi Amali and Ibrahim Dinani, they've criticized this framing and translation of virtual as majaz. Ayatollah Jawadi Amali says that the space that we call virtual is in truth a real and actual space, and not just simply a figurative one. He says we do not have the right to label this world as a virtual and unreal one. And then he mentions when it is possible to exchange ideas and thoughts in this online world, and this exchange can cause the young to be transformed, this is a world of reality. So here, he has given us a criterion for what he considers real, or at least what the real should encompass. He says that the real should encompass the exchange of ideas and thoughts and should have the ability to transform. So now we're left with the question, so if we're in a world and if we're in a space where there is no exchange of ideas, where there is no back and forth of knowledge, then is this world real? It could be physical. I could be sitting with someone in a room or in an institution. But if we're not exchanging ideas and the act of seeking knowledge and imparting knowledge is not taking place, then is this sitting of ours, is this gathering of ours, is it real? And if this, and similarly, we could be having an exchange of ideas, but those ideas may be of no real value in that they cannot transform anybody in the real and non-superficial sense. So if that is also not happening according to this discussion of Wadi, then this would fall outside of what we would consider real, or at least the real that has value. So even in our physical world, if we're not having this interaction with knowledge, then we're not really living in the real world. We are in a state of slumber, we're sleeping. And this is what makes our gatherings for the Ahlul Bayt, whether they be physical or whether they are online, places where we can actually engage with reality. Because we're involved in the act of seeking knowledge, because we're sitting to learn and educate ourselves, and because we take that knowledge and then discuss with one another and share with one another, we share the teachings with one another, we impart them onto our families and other friends. Because we're engaged in this, this makes our gatherings of the Ahlul Bayt, wherever they are, in whatever shape and form they are, as long as this act of educating ourselves and learning, and when we say educating, we're talking about in the general sense, because the Islamic understanding of education, we're talking about in the sense of the Islamic understanding of education. And we're hearing these thoughts and ideas. So what is in fact is happening is we're taking ourselves away from this world, which is constantly inviting us to slumber and sleep, and is inviting us to distractions and temptations. We're moving ourselves from there. And when we place ourselves into the majalis of the Ahlul Bayt, into the gatherings of where the Ahlul Bayt are remembered, and through them we remember also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're taking ourselves from the unreal to the real. We're taking ourselves to gatherings in where people are awake. And of course, the age of COVID has allowed that this exchange of ideas be amplified. We are now able to seek and listen to live gatherings even from all around the world. So not only are we we don't have the idea that we're sitting and listening to someone and we're disconnected from them, or I'm in one area and that other individual is in a different area, and we're both somehow, because of the technology we have, just tuning into the same meeting. In reality, we're sitting together. In reality, we're gathering together. In reality, we are participating in what could be the truest form of the real. So as such, while it's preferred for us to be together as a congregation, we shouldn't feel that our participation is inadequate because we're not physically face to face. This is all because of our circumstances, but it does not take away from the authenticity and the blessings and the beauty of our gathering. And this was an introduction to the theme of Walaya and Azar in the age of COVID. In short, if done properly, we can turn this opportunity into one where we bless our homes and where we interact with reality. So moving on, looking at and I want to look at the movement of Imam Hussein in this light, separating the real from the unreal, truth from falsehood. The Islam of the Prophet from the Islam of Banu Umayyah, a godly life from an ungodly life. The role of Imam Hussein in casting the stuff that separates these two from one another and makes clear one from the other. The reality of life itself, what actually is living and what is breathing while dead. There's a difference between living and being able to breathe and walk and eat while being dead within. The verse that we opened with, we said Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, verse 24 of Surah Al-Anfal. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu astajibu lillahi wa lirrasuli idha du'akum lima yuhyikum. O you who have faith, answer Allah and the Apostle when he summons you to that which will give you life. The verse continues, it says, وَأَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ يَحُولُ بَيْنَ الْمَرْءِ وَقَلْبِهِ وَأَنَّهُ إِلَيْهِ تُحْشَرُونَ. That know that Allah intervenes between man and his heart, and toward him you will be mustered, toward him you will be gathered. So the first part of this verse, which talks about, the first part explains to us the purpose behind Imam Hussein's various decisions and stances. We're taking this verse and we're applying it as an instance on Imam Hussein alayhi salam. It says that, oh, you who have faith, answer Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet when you are invited, when they invite you. Why? Why should you answer them? And the reason it gives this is, the reason that's given here is that so that you will be given life. Now, this would be a very odd verse if it was speaking to the dead, to the unliving. If it was speaking to the people of the grave and it said, answer the Prophet, answer God and the Prophet so that you may be given life, we may wonder, will they be brought back to life? Will they stop being dead? And how can the dead answer the Prophet and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? This is talking to a living people. It's talking to a group of people that were breathing, they were eating, they were sleeping. They were carrying out all the functions of a living individual we understand as living. But the verse is saying that the life that they have now is not a true life. The life that they have in this is not a true life. If they listen to the invitation of God and Prophet, they have a chance of being revived and made to be alive. So Imam Hussein's, how does this fit in with the narrative of Imam Hussein? Imam Hussein was inviting people towards the Book of God and the Sunnah of the Prophet. We're trying to use this verse and to understand Imam Hussein's stances. He says in his letter to the people of Basra, وَأَنَا أَدْعُوكُمْ إِلَى كِتَابِ اللَّهِ وَسُنَّةِ النَّبِيِّ صلى الله عليه وآله فإن سنة قد أمتت وإن بدعة قد أحيت. He says, I invite you to the Book of God and the Sunnah of his Prophet. Indeed, the Sunnah has been eradicated, or it has been eradicated or been made to die, and the innovations have been revived. So the Imam is inviting the Prophet, the Imam is inviting the people back to the Prophet and back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just as the Prophet was trying to bring back the people from the Jahiliyyah of paganism, the ignorance of the age of paganism or the pre-Islamic era, Imam Hussein was trying to bring back these people to life from what? They were already Muslims. He was trying to bring them back to life from the Jahiliyyah of the Umayyad Islam and bring them back into the prophetic Islam, which was true life. The second part of this verse, and we'll continue to examine this first part, but we'll mention the second part briefly. It tells us why Imam Hussein could see what he could and others could not understand, why Imam Hussein could make certain decisions. So we understand what Imam Hussein was inviting people to. He was inviting them essentially towards life. But now the second part tells us that Imam Hussein was able to make decisions and see things that others were not able to see. He was able to look onto matters and see them differently, even from his close family members, even from his brother, his cousins, his uncle. It says that know that Allah intervenes between man and his heart, and toward him you will be mustered. This relationship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the human being, Allah intervenes between man and his heart. Imam Hussein, because of his state of consciousness, because of his relationship with Allah, was able to understand and appreciate this intervention of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was able to understand this inspiration that was coming through this intervention of Allah within his heart. And because of that, he was able to see a horizon. He was able to see a number of actions and understand the consequences in a way that others weren't able to do so, even if they were the closest family members. Because the level of this connection, this is not to say that the other family members did not have a connection, right? Because this verse is talking about human beings in general, but it's how much you're able to tap in. That inspiration is there, but how much are we able to tap into that inspiration? How much have we actualized our potential in doing that? So back to these people, these were living and breathing people. They were praying people, they were fasting people, but they were not truly alive. They were not experiencing real life. And Imam Hussein was trying to awaken them. He was trying to resuscitate the ummah. Through innovations, they had died, but through the sunnah, they could regain life. Here, I would like to mention a definition of man offered by Ayatollah Jawadi Amali. So generally in Aristotelian thought, man is described as the rational animal. This has been accepted by many thinkers and philosophers and logicians since, including many Muslim ones. In one place, Ayatollah Jawadi tries to complete this definition, and he says that yes, man is a rational animal, but also one which is hamid, meaning one that praises. And of course, this praise, this hamd that is being done of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, as we know, because hamd, when you praise, you need to know what you're praising. To be able to praise properly, you have to have an understanding of that thing which you are trying to praise, and even at the most basic level. So the level of one's humanness is linked to their knowledge, because that knowledge leads to the ability to praise. So the level of one's humanness is linked to their ability to praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is linked to their understanding and their gnosis of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The ma'rifah of Allah that they have. The more ma'rifah that they gain in their heart, the more ma'rifah of Allah that they are able to attain, the more they are increased in even being human, the more they are actualizing their potential to be human. The other definition, though, that Ayatollah Jawadi offers is that man is a living and godly being, hayy muta'allih, hayyun muta'allih, meaning that human beings, the characteristics that they have to qualify as being truly human is that they have to be living in the sense that we've spoken about, because we've mentioned that living is not defined by the simple act of breathing and the simple act of being able to reproduce or other things, but truly living and muta'allih. They are God-centered and God-centric. So if human beings remove this from themselves, they remove an element of humanity from themselves. They remove themselves from truly being real humans. If they do not think and rationalize, then they are not truly living. This does not mean that we treat such individuals, if we're fortunate to not be amongst them, in a inhumane way. We do not treat them in a way that they are animals. No, we still have a responsibility to bring them back. We still have a responsibility to give them life. This is what the verse is talking about, that the Prophet is inviting you to give you life. It's talking to people that are not truly living. It's when we talk about the idea of not being God-centric, being equal to being removed from your humanity, this doesn't mean we're done with these individuals and we no longer care. Again, if we're fortunate enough not to be one of them, we still have a responsibility regarding them. And this is where we find Imam Hussein's movement rooted in this idea of bringing these people back. These people have moved away from their potential, from their where they truly should be as humans. Imam Hussein is bringing them back to that. And he did this by risking his own life. He did this by risking his family in the process. And he was martyred. He was killed in trying to achieve this. He was trying to free these individuals from their mental slavery to the Umayyad ways. or he also was trying to free them from that Islam without the Walaya that is. And if we look at the letters of the Imam, if we look at the conversations he was having with individuals, we see this is one of the central parts of his movement. This is a recurring theme within his movement. The idea that we are trying to revive the Sunnah of the Prophet, we're trying to revive the Book of God in the lives of the Muslimin. And this is among the things that makes Imam Hussein's martyrdom so tragic and so unique. The question arises that why do we particularly mourn Imam Hussein? There have been many other very tragic killings and murdering since the time of Imam Hussein. There have been nuclear bombs have been, atomic bombs have been used, weapons that can defoul individuals and damage them, not only them, but their generations to come. Such weapons can be used and have been used. People have been killed in many gruesome ways. So why is it that we commemorate and remember and give special importance, even amongst the Ahlul Bayt, to the martyrdom of Imam Hussein? And it's in light, one of the reasons I would like to mention is in light of this act, this practice, this spirit of the Imam, and that the Imam was not trying to call the people to rally behind him for personal reasons. The Imam was not trying to gather them for his own sake, for his own benefit. He was not trying to gain them, to gain their support for the sake of power. He could have easily secured that. The Imam could have given allegiance, and he would have been given, very likely, a position of influence. He was an asset. If the despicable rulers, the Umayyads, could have used the Imams as an asset, then that would have been much more preferable to them. They, rather than having to kill them and then have to try and explain that killing, if they were able to take the Imam and have him on their side, this would have been much more to their benefit. So when the Imam was calling people, when he was trying to save them, he was not doing so for the sake of worldly power. He was not doing so for the sake of wealth. He could have been given that and attained that also through giving his allegiance. And had he gotten his allegiance, he could have increased his influence. And we can think of many different ways of how sometimes we think, and it comes to us, a question comes to us, we read the advice that the companions were giving the family members of the Imam who did not join him. We look at the advice and it makes a lot of sense to us. We think, if the Imam had not gone into Makkah, he did not go to Kufa, and he had changed his route and he had gone elsewhere, he could have made a plan, he could have gathered people, he could have tested them, he could have waited until he was in a position to have challenged Yazid with a strong enough army, and where he had tested them and know that they would be behind him, rather than just taking their words. All of these things make sense to us, and all of these calculations come to our mind. But because we don't have that same connection that Imam Hussein enjoyed between him and God, we're not able to understand why he did what he did. We can only now make assumptions in retrospect about what he was trying to achieve based on what he had achieved. And we truly have not even grasped what Imam Hussein was able to achieve through this martyrdom of his. But we know at least it was not for personal gain at that time. We know it wasn't for some of the simplistic reasons that we may attribute to the Imam. He was slaughtered for not compromising on the revival of the prophetic Sunnah and the Book of Allah. He was slaughtered for trying to help and guide the people towards God and paradise, the righteous way, the upright way. As he mentions, according to one of the letters, the Sabil al-Rishad. So he was slaughtered by those that he was trying to quench their thirst. How did these people come to this state? These individuals, how did they come to life? Because the Prophet had already taken it upon this mission. The Prophet had already done his part. He had come and he played this role of this da'wah to that which brings them to life, right? it says, and of course, even when we're talking about the Prophet's mission, one part of the Prophet's mission was inviting people into Islam. And then the verse that we recited, it starts off as saying, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu astajibu lillahi wa lirrasul. So it was already speaking to the people of faith, and it was telling them that, look, you may have faith, but you're not at the level where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would say that you are living. Because now he's saying that answer so you may become alive. But what happened that these people were around the Prophet, they learned from the Prophet's teaching, yeah? Gradually and slowly, they parted from them, they moved away from them, and they ended up some 50 years after the Prophet's demise, standing against his grandson, who had the same call, who was calling to the same things. How had they come to die again to the extent where it was required that this invitation be done again? And it goes back to some of the points that we mentioned from the beginning, from this idea that truly the hearts can only be alive, firstly and foremostly through the thinking, through thought, through exchanging ideas, and also doing this in the way that Islam desires, doing this not with any and all information, not with all knowledge, but knowledge that is beneficial, knowledge which has the ability to purify, knowledge which can take us towards our purpose, which brings us closest towards our purpose. And because these people had stopped engaging that, because they had been separated from Walaya, they'd come and found themselves directly opposed to the grandson of the Holy Prophet. They had allowed themselves to stop thinking, they had allowed themselves to stop engaging in those important questions. When they saw that all of a sudden Yazid ibn Muawiyah is now the ruler of the Muslims, yes, some of them took action, but there was something that had happened to them that they weren't able to follow through with this claim of support for Imam Hussein. They invited the Imam towards Kufa. It wasn't the Imam who sent a letter. The Imam's letter to the people of Basra was preemptive. Sorry, it was initiated by the Imam, at least based on what we have in the sources. But the people of Kufa invited the Imam. The Imam answered their call, and he gives the reasons why he did so. But what happened to these individuals who, at some level, were able to see the corruption of a ruler like Yazid, but at the same time did not have it within them to be able to follow through and support the Imam of their time? These are serious questions that we have to think about. And we know that this is because they had not given enough importance to the teachings and the Sunnah of the Prophet. What they were following was not the Sunnah. So this leaves us with the question, then what is the Sunnah? The Sunnah of the Prophet and the orders of God cannot just be the prayers in their physical form, or the fasting, which is the abstinence of food. It has to be more than this. There has to be a spirit in there which allows people and prevents them from coming to this stage where they die once more. So Imam Hussein was killed by these drowning souls that he was trying to save, for the simple reason, and only for the reason, that he was trying to save them. And this is why his death and his martyrdom is so tragic. He wasn't doing it for fame. He could have, there was many other ways for him to have become what we would consider successful, but through his actions, he was constantly, as we mentioned towards the beginning of this talk, he was removing the veils between truth and falsehood. He was unblurring the lines of that time between what was real and unreal. He was showing people that while you pray and fast, this is not the Sunnah of the Prophet. The Sunnah of the Prophet has died. The Sunnah of the Prophet has died with the Islam that you're practicing. He was inviting them back to the Book of Allah. And these individuals, while the Imam was inviting them to the Sabil al-Rashad, while he was inviting them to heaven, they turned against him. He was working for their salvation, yet they drew their swords against him. And even those that had invited him betrayed him. They had left the state of being human They had stepped down from this lofty state of being human, of being alive, and they had become wild beasts. They had allowed their hearts to become polluted to the extent that they murdered the holiest man amongst them and all the Muslims. Without thinking, without contemplating on the teachings of the Prophet and the Holy Quran, they had allowed their hearts to become so filled with filth, so filled with darkness that they could no longer see the light that was shining from the message of Imam Hussein, from the grandson of the Holy Prophet. And this is something we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from. And this is something that we have to ensure that within ourselves, and we have these gatherings, we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the opportunity of these gatherings of Walaya and these gatherings of Azah. And we hope that through them we're able to keep ourselves alive, that through them we're able to keep living, that through them we're able to live a real life, not a life which we are which we are in fact sleeping, but a life which we are aware and awake. Sallallahu alayhi ya Aba Abdillah wa ala al-arwah allati hallat bifina. عليكم مني السلام ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار يا أبا عبد الله يا أبا عبد الله. Brothers and sisters, there are images of Karbala that rip our hearts apart. So what would these images have done to the lady Zainab and the woman folk? Those who were there and saw with their own eyes as these beasts unleashed themselves upon the grandson of the Holy Prophet. How does one erase from their eyes the sight of Shimr jalisun ala sadr al-Hussein, the sight of the accursed Shimr sitting upon the chest of Imam Hussein, looking at the blood-covered face and beard of the grandson of the Prophet with complete audacity, without an ounce of mercy. How does one forget the horses trampling the bodies of noble men and young boys on desert lands? How does one drown out the sound of the crushing bones and the merrymaking of the enemies as they celebrate the killing of Imam Hussein? How do you overcome the immense sadness of leaving your family members unburied on the desert lands? How does Lady Zainab part as she looks back and she sees that her brother has not been given a burial? And she does not know when this burial will happen, or if it will happen, will her brother be left on these lands at the mercy of animals? Sallallahu alayka ya Aba Abdillah wa ala al-arwah allati hallat bifanaik. The wretched enemies did not suffice with murdering the Imam and trampling over the bodies, but they also severed his head. They beheaded him, the grandson of the Prophet, and they paraded the heads in the bazaars, in the streets of the Muslim cities, and the Muslims came and watched. They took the captive, the most noble of women, and forced them to be humiliated. We cannot imagine what went through the heart of Lady Zainab from one tragedy to another. She saw one death of the Prophet's family to another, one loyal companion of Hussein to another until her brother was taken. And then the bodies of these young men who had barely fully grown were trampled under the horses. And then these tragedies were not to end. She was taken captives, and of the heart of Imam Sajjad. What emotions did he feel seeing the women folk paraded through the street? What of his ghairah? How did he look upon them and see these women who were known for their chastity and their modesty, who were paraded as captives and criminals through the bazaars of Sham and the bazaars of Kufa? صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless all of those who have participated in these and will participate in these gatherings. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase the tawfiq and the opportunity for good of all the organizers. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase our love and our admiration and our admiration for the prophetic family and our obedience of the prophetic ways for us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to revive the prophetic sunnah in our hearts and keep it alive, and through us give us true life. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless all of the believers and protect them, and particularly in these times we ask him to protect their health and their well-being and keep them safe in this pandemic, and allow them and all of those who are suffering beyond health reasons. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove the difficulties and give us the opportunity to continue in these gatherings, inshallah ta'ala. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
أجركم على الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. We will now go to the Nohafani. And with Shabir Tijani. So I'll pass the mic to Shabir.
As we heard in the Masa'ib, the trials that befell our beloved Imam Sajjad in the Bazaar of Kufa, in the Bazaar of Sham, in the darbars, in the prisons, is one that cannot be comprehended. And tonight we'll remember that Imam of ours. Inshallah, I'll present one Noha in English and one Noha in Urdu to try and, so that all of our viewers and all of our listeners have something that they can relate to. Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain. You taught us the art of supplication. You showed us the power of prostration to make Islam our life's foundation, and how to ask Allah for salvation. Such is your status, so holy soul. You made Allah's love your only goal. Oh my Imam, oh my Imam Zainul Abidin, oh my Imam Zainul Abidin, oh Sajjad, you were imprisoned, your feet were in chains, and on the chains splattered were your blood stains. Inside your heart were the scars of those pains, of what you saw that day on the hard plains. Oh, you were patience personified. You thanked Allah though your hands were tied. Oh, my Imam, oh, my Imam Zainul Abidin, oh, my Imam Zainul Abidin, oh, Sajjad, You saw your father's head on the spear, your mother's bareheaded and in fear. Your sister was treated so severe that blood was pouring down from her ear. And yet you were so brave that you spoke, and in the courtyard the world awoke. Oh my Imam, oh my Imam Zainul Abidin, oh my Imam Zainul Abidin, oh Sajjad, for 40 long years you kept on weeping, 'cause in your mind Sham kept on repeating the lashes you got and all the beating. For all these feelings there is no healing. Those memories always will be raw, of what you heard, felt, and what you saw. Oh my Imam, oh my Imam Zainul Abidin, oh my Imam Zainul Abidin, oh Sajjad. And let's remember that little 4-year-old girl, that 4-year-old sister of Imam Sajjad's, who he buried in the prisons, who remains in the prison until today, who he buried with his own 2 hands. With quaking hands, how you dug a small grave, a resting place for Sakina to lay. Her shroud was her shirt covered in bloodstains. Till end of time, this is how she will stay. Until today, she's so far from home. The prison is dark and she's alone. Oh my Imam, oh my Imam Zainul Abidin, oh my Imam Zainul Abidin, oh Sajjad, you are my guidance, my inspiration. To emulate you is my intention. In every moment, in every second, your love will flow in me like an ocean. You are the leader of all of man, so please give us all a helping hand. Oh my Imam, ये सोच के रोता हूँ, माँ बहन खुले सिर है, किस तरह से देखूंगा जो सामने मंज़िल है, नेज़े पे है एक सिर, रोता है जो अक्सर, करता है जो नोहा, लो आ गया बाजार, मजलूम का कुर्बा जब शाम को पहुंचा, आबिद का था नोहा, लो आ गया बाजार, लो आ गया बाजार। हर एक कदम बाबा कुरान सुनाता है, और आग के पत्थर खुद चेहरे पे वो खाता है। सहरा का दुलारा, अहमद का नवासा है बरसर नेज़ा, लो आ गया बाजार, लो आ गया बाजार। पर्दे का मुहाफिज आग सर अपना गिराता है, खून रोता है वो गाजी जब भी नजर आता है। ज़ैनब का खुला सिर और शाम का मंज़र, सर पे नहीं पर्दा, लो आ गया बाजार, और शिमरे ये आबिद से किस फख्र से कहता है, पर्दा तेरी ज़ैनब का नेज़े से उतारा है, क़ुव्वत है ये मेरी अहमद की नवाज़ी को शाम में लाया, लो आ गया बाज़ार। वो नन्ही सकीना को मांगा है कनीज़ी में, मैं मरता हूँ जीते जी माहौल शराबी में, घबराती है बच्ची और होके में भाई कुछ कर नहीं सकता, लो आ गया बाज़ार। जिस बीबी को सूरज ने हरगिज़ नहीं देखा था, बेपर्दा खड़ी थी वो शैतानों का मजमा था, चेहरे को तिजानी बालों से छुपाई, पढ़ती रही खुतबा, लो आ गया बाज़ार। मज़लूम का कुनबा जब शाम को पहुंचा, आबिद का था नौहा, लो आ गया बाज़ार। वो आबिदे बीमार था, चलने से जो लाचार था, और शाम का बाजार था, और शाम का बाजार था, और मुस्तफा की बेटियां मौला हक इमाम या हसन या हुसैन, मौला हक इमाम या हसन या हुसैन, या हुसैन या हुसैन, 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 या हुसैन या हुसैन। اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
أجركم الله الزهراء. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. We now go to Sheikh Kamal Rajani, who will recite the ziyarah with which we will conclude today's program.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا أمين الله في أرضه وحجته على عباده. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، أشهد أنك جاهدت في الله حق جهاده، وعملت بكتابه، واتبعت سنن نبيه صلى الله عليه وآله، حتى دعاك الله إلى جواره فقبضك إليه باختياره، وألزم أعداءك الحجة مع ما لك من الحجج البالغة على جميع خلقه. اللهم فاجعل نفسي مطمئنة بقدرك، راضية بقضائك، مولأة بذكرك ودعائك، محبة لصفوة أوليائك، محبوبة في أرضك وسمائك، صابرة على نزول بلائك، شاكرة لفواضل نعمائك، ذاكرة لصواب آلائك، مشتاقة إلى فرحة لقائك، متزودة التقوى ليوم جزائك، مصطنة بسنن أوليائك، مفارقة لأخلاق أعدائك، مجبورة مشغولة عن الدنيا بحمدك وثنائك. اللهم إن قلوب المخبتين إليك والها، وسبل الراغبين إليك شارعا، وعلام القاصدين إليك واضحا، وأفئدة العارفين منك فاضعا، وأصوات الداعين إليك صاعدا، وأبواب الإجابة لهم مفتحة، ودعوة من ناجاك مستجابة، وتوبة من أناب إليك مقبولا، وعبرة من بكى من خوفك مرحوما، والإغاثة لمن استغاث بك موجودا، والإعانة لمن استعان بك مبذولا، وعداتك لعبادك منجزا، وزلل من استقالك مقالا، وأعمال العاملين لديك محفوظا، وأرزاقك إلى الخلائق من لدنك نازلا، وعوائد المزيد إليهم واصلا، وذنوب المستغفرين مغفورا، وحوائج خلقك عندك مقضيا، وجوائز السائلين عندك موفرا، وعواعد المزيد متواترا، ومواعيد المستدعمين معدا، ومناحل الذماع مطرعا. اللهم فاستجب دعائي واقبل ثنائي، واجمع بيني وبين أوليائي بحق محمد وعلي وفاطمة والحسن والحسين، إنك ولي نعمائي ومنتهى مناي وغاية رجائي في منقلبي ومثواي. أنت إلهي وسيدي ومولاي، اغفر لأوليائنا وكف عنا أعداءنا، واشغلهم عن عضانا، وأظهر كلمة الحق واجعلها العليا، وأدحض كلمة الباطل واجعلها السفلى، إنك على كل شيء قدير. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته، السلام على الأئمة الهادين المهديين، السلام على جميع أنبياء الله ورسله وملائكته، السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين، السلام على علي أمير المؤمنين، السلام على الحسن المجتبى، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك، عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين، السلام على علي بن الحسين زين العابدين، السلام على محمد بن علي باقر علم النبيين، السلام على جعفر بن محمد الصادق، السلام على موسى بن جعفر القادم، السلام على أبي الحسن علي بن موسى الرضا، غريب الغرباء ومعين الضعفاء والفقراء، شمس الشموس وانيس النفوس، علي بن موسى الرضا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام على محمد بن علي الجواد، السلام على علي بن محمد الهادي، السلام على الحسن بن علي الذكي العصغري، السلام على الحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي المنتظر، السلام على بقية الله في أرضه، السلام على خليفة الله في أرضه، السلام عليك يا إمام زماننا هذا، عجل الله تعالى فرجك الشريف ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على محمد.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Thank you, Sheikh Kumail. We will, of course, with that, of course, our program today is completed. Please do join us again tomorrow for more of the zikr of the Ahlul Bayt, which, as we heard today, is very much something which enlivens the heart and keeps us alive, because it keeps us attached to Walaya and ultimately to God. So we will return at 6:30 p.m. London time, 1:30 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow, and our Khatib tomorrow will be Sheikh Vinay Ketia from Toronto. So inshallah, hope to see you all then, and in the meanwhile, please do take care of each other. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.